I went back to law school, and I did get a job doing what I thought I wanted to do, which was working at what was then called the Developmentally Disabled Unit at Legal Services. And I was so bad at it. I was just terrible.
But why were you so bad at it? I mean, it doesn't seem like you'd be bad at it. You're a good talker, you're smart. Why were you bad at it?
No, I was just awful. My poor clients, I would have to argue in front of these administrative law judges and say that my clients' benefits should be reinstated, and they just say no. And I'd say, okay.
I'm so happy to be here again. I'm always happy to be back in my home away from home. So let me introduce our star for the evening, Elizabeth Strout. Elizabeth Strout was born in Portland, Maine, and she grew up in small towns in Maine and New Hampshire. She thought of herself as a writer from an early age. She kept notebooks about her daily life. She read widely. She memorized poetry. Hers was not a direct route, though, to the writing life. She took a detour early on when she went to law school, and she practiced law for 6 months, which seems to have been just long enough to cure her of any desire to continue in that field. Her first short story was published when she was 26, but real breakout success didn't come until she was 40 with the publication of Amy and Isabel, the story of a mother and daughter. Since then, Elizabeth Strout has published 5 more books, among them the Pulitzer Prize winning Olive Kittredge, which I'm sure many of you have read. It's where I first came to Elizabeth Strout, and I'm sure you may have seen the HBO series starring, what's her name? Frances McDormand, thank you, who I think we can agree can play Flinty better than just about any other person in the world. She was wonderful in that series. In 2016, Elizabeth Strout produced the widely acclaimed My Name is Lucy Barton, in which the title character looks back at her life as she convalesces in hospital with her problematic mother at her side. In fact, Elizabeth Strout was supposed to have been here at the Appel Salon for that book in last winter, but was sidelined by a snowstorm, as I recall. Her new book, Anything is Possible, is in some ways a companion piece to Lucy Barton. It's a collection of stories about the people that Lucy grew up with in Amgash, Illinois, and about whom she and her mother gossiped in My Name is Lucy Barton. Lucy herself makes an appearance in the book when she comes home to visit her brother and sister, and her memoir is much discussed by the locals. Having wisely invited Elizabeth Strout for May this time, we are so very pleased to have her with us tonight. Please welcome Elizabeth Strout. So Elizabeth is going to read from the beginning of the book, just to give you a little sense of the way the writing flows.
It's the beginning. Tommy Guptill had once owned a dairy farm, which he'd inherited from his father, and which was about 2 miles from the town of Amgash, Illinois. This was many years ago now, but at night, Tommy still sometimes woke with the fear he had felt the night his dairy farm burned to the ground. The house had burned to the ground as well. The wind had sent sparks onto the house, which was not far from the barns. It had been his fault. He always thought it was his fault, because he had not checked that night on the milking machines to make sure they had been turned off properly, and this is where the fire started. Once it started, it ripped with a fury over the whole place. They lost everything except for the brass frame to the living room mirror, which he came upon in the rubble the next day, and he left it where it was. A collection was taken up. For a number of weeks, his kids went to school in the clothes of their classmates until he could gather himself and the little money he had. He sold the land to a neighboring farmer, but it did not bring much money in. Then he and his wife, a short, pretty woman named Shirley, bought new clothes, and he bought a house as well, Shirley keeping her spirits up admirably as all this was going on. They'd had to buy a house in Amgash, which was a run-down town, and his kids were sent to school there instead of in Carlisle, where they had been able to go to school before, his farm being just on the line dividing the 2 towns. Tommy took a job as the janitor in the Amgash school system. The steadiness of the job appealed to him, and he could never go to work on someone else's farm. He did not have the stomach for that. He was 35 years old at the time. The kids were grown now, with kids of their own who were also grown, and he and Shirley still lived in their small house. She had planted flowers around it, which was unusual in that town. Tommy had worried a good deal about his children at the time of the fire. They had gone from having their home be a place that class trips came to. Each year in spring, the 5th grade class from Carlisle would make a day of it, eating their lunches out beside the barns on the wooden tables there, then tromping through the barns, watching the men milking the cows, the white foamy stuff going up and over them in the clear plastic pipes, to having to see their father as the man who pushed the broom over the magic dust that got tossed over the throw-up of some kid who had been sick in the hallways, Tommy wearing his gray pants and a white shirt that had Tommy stitched on it in red. Well, they had all lived through it.
Thank you. So I said it was kind of a companion piece to My Name is Lucy Barton. Were you actually writing them at the same time? And how did one become a novel and one become a book of short stories?
Right. Well, I was writing them at the same time. I was writing pieces of Anything is Possible at the same time that I was writing My Name is Lucy Barton, because as I listened to, or as I wrote, but heard their conversations about different people from the hometown, I just became so interested, and I would think, well, what did happen to Kathy Nicely? And so I would, sort of run around to a different part of this big table and write some scenes about what happened to Kathy Nicely and Mississippi Mary and things like that. And so then when I got done with My Name is Lucy Barton, I realized, oh, I have a book. Or almost a book. And then I wrote some more. So
when you were writing Lucy, we get a glimpse of some of the characters in Lucy Barton,
right,
and the other way around, as I just said. I remember when you were, I looked at some of your interviews when you were touring for Lucy Barton, and quite often you were asked the question, is Lucy Barton a reliable narrator? And one of the things you said was you thought she was, because she qualified a lot of the things she said. She would say, well, I think I remember it that way, or I'm not quite sure it was like that. But as we find out in this book, there are many, many things Lucy didn't tell us. So right, I wonder if you could just talk about that, like, why she didn't tell us, and what was your, how do you decided when to reveal what you're revealing?
Well, I didn't decide to reveal much of Lucy's background until I was actually writing the story Sister, where she goes home to visit her brother and her sister. And I didn't even know, I wasn't sure that I wanted Lucy in this book. And that was one of the last stories that I wrote, because I just wasn't sure that Lucy Barton should show up with the camera outside of her head, because My Name is Lucy Barton is written in first person, and her voice is so distinct that I wasn't sure it was a decision I wanted to make, to have the third person narration and be looking at her from the outside like that. But then when I figured out through her brother Pete, I just sort of tried it different ways, and then I kind of sidled up next to her brother and said, oh, okay, I'll hang out with you and we'll see what happens. So then as I was writing that story, I realized, okay, let's have these different details come out that Lucy has stayed away from in her own memoir. Because Lucy, for a number of reasons, Lucy wasn't I don't think of Lucy as a person who would press the face, she's not going to press your face in certain things. And she may not have remembered.
Yeah, and I wondered too if it was the stories we tell ourselves to make our lives bearable.
Yeah.
If you've read Lucy Barton, you'll know that Lucy's life was one of crushing poverty and social isolation. Her family was called white trash and filth, and they were really, cooties, all those horrible things that, we remember from school. So I thought maybe this was just a way of, she just didn't go there.
Yeah,
and when she had to go there,
she had to go there.
She had to go there, yeah.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that, like the poverty in the, how do people recover from that kind of poverty? Lucy goes on to have a successful career. She becomes a writer. Her cousin Abel becomes quite a successful businessman. How does one overcome that? Or what are the effects of a kind of a deprived childhood like that?
I don't think that a person ever fully gets over a childhood like that, but we all go on. People are always moving onward and managing to survive. But I think, Abel Blaine's story, I think I'm probably misquoting myself, but it's me, so I can do that. Abel Blaine says something about what puzzled him most about life was how much one forgot but lived with anyway, like phantom limbs, he supposed. And so I think that sort of sums it up. How, you just go on and you forget certain things, but they're with you.
Yeah. One of the themes in the book, I think, is class.
Yes, very much.
And Lucy, too, I think.
Right.
And one of the characters says in one of the later stories, I think, something about America didn't really like to think it had a class, but just didn't talk about it because it didn't really think it had a class problem, and it didn't actually know what class was.
Right.
So can you talk about that?
Right.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's true.
Because she wrote it.
No, I know, but I happen to agree with my character, Dottie, who wrote that. I think that we obviously have a serious class issue in America, and I don't think that people are comfortable talking about it. And I feel that I've been writing about it in all of my work, starting with Amy and Isabel and the mill-working women, and then the women who weren't working, whatever. But so I think that class has always been interesting to me, and then with My Name is Lucy Barton, I thought, I'm going to push this. I'm going to really push this and make her come from one of those rural families that we have in America. We have them more and more, that's so poor that they're ostracized simply because they're that poor, and they're strange. And so, and then I thought, what does it feel like for her to cross class lines, because that's a very American story as well. But... Oh, right, back to Dottie. So anyway, right, so I don't think that people are comfortable talking about class in our country, and
because you like to think there is no class. It's not like Britain, which is so stratified.
Right.
You think maybe there isn't a class system here.
I think people really don't know how to talk about it, and I think that in America they can't quite figure out what it is, because is it education? Is it income? Because if you look at the numbers now, it's not just income. But I have decided that I think class is determined by how much power a person feels that they have in their life toward the powers to be. So, you can have an income that keeps you above the poverty line, but if you don't feel that you have any power with that, then that's my thought about what might be happening.
So the first 4 books were all set in New England, Maine, I think, or
and partly New York, right?
And Lucy Barton and this one are set in Amgash, Illinois.
Right.
So why the move from New England to the Midwest?
Right. Whew, it was so freeing.
I thought you were going to say it was so freezing.
No.
I was going to say yes, that too.
That too. It was just so free. When I was writing, I just as I was really beginning some of those first scenes with Lucy and her mother in the hospital, it came to me rather early on, and this is always a good thing when something happens early on in the process. I realized, I thought, I saw sky, just tons of sky. And in Maine, there's sky, but you don't see it that much because there's all these trees and stuff. And so in the Midwest, it's just sky. And I saw that with Lucy, and I realized, oh, wait a minute, this is so interesting. And then I saw a little tiny house in the middle of all this sky. So that's how I knew Lucy was going to come from the Midwest. And I've been to the Midwest a number of times, but when I realized that I was going to be writing this, my husband and I made a number of trips out there. And so, at different times of the season, so I could make sure that, I had the soybeans the right height in the right time of year. And we also had, we had a Thanksgiving dinner at a congregational church, just as Lucy's family would have. So it was fun.
It's interesting because the characters that we think of as, so Maine or so New England, Olive Kittredge and the others in your book, those qualities of stoicism and endurance, they're here too.
I
mean, are these the same people? People move from Maine to...
Yes, these are the same people, only they think they're even better because they moved and went west. And by God, that was something.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So can you talk, you may be sick of talking about this, but can you talk about those qualities of endurance? For instance, you ended that lovely section where you read where, I forget what the last line was, they lived through it. They all lived through it. And again, you know, one of the characters in this book says, well, a person simply has to decide how they're going to live their life. So it's not sentimental, it's just you get on with it, life beats you up, but you just get on with it.
Right.
Can you talk about that?
Well, that was, you know, very much my particular New England background, which is you just keep your mouth shut, which was hard for me because I was, you know, a blabbermouth from the very, beginning. But you keep your mouth shut and you just keep going. You just endure and you work hard, and that is what you are here to do. You are here to do hard work, hopefully in the service of somebody else. Mm-hmm. And that's it. Period.
So not big on the fun quotient then?
Oh, no.
And was that your...
Oh, dear.
So was that what your childhood was like? I mean, not that you had a Lucy-deprived childhood, but did you have a kind of restricted childhood in that sense?
I did have a very restricted... No, my childhood was not at all like Lucy's childhood. But, I mean, my parents were educated and they were...
Teachers.
And no. But the puritanical part of my childhood was very much there. And it really wasn't until I moved to New York that I realized, you know, food actually could taste good. You could enjoy it. Some people actually did enjoy it. And, you know, there was a whole life out there.
Yeah. And I think, if I'm right, your first husband was Jewish?
Yes.
So you went away from this puritanical family where people shook hands to this, you know, hand-waving, kissing.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Were you in heaven, or were you?
I was in heaven. I was in heaven, yes.
Oh, it sounds great.
Yeah.
So I mentioned in the introduction that you were a lawyer for a while early on, and that you did it for 6 months. So obviously not a happy camper. Why did you not like being a lawyer? Or perhaps why did you go to law school would be the better question.
Well, I went to law school because I was very tired of being a cocktail waitress and not having anything published. I just couldn't get anybody to be interested remotely in anything that I sent out to them. And I was a waitress. I was a breakfast waitress, and that's really very difficult work because nobody tips.
Yeah.
And you have to run around, you know, filling the coffee up all the time and get 30 cents if you're lucky. And then, you know, lunchtime waitressing really broke up the day. You know, so anyway, so the cocktail, I was just so tired of it. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna, you know, go to law school, and I'm gonna do good things during the day because I had a social conscience.
Right.
And I still do. And, well, anyway, so I thought I'll go to law school and I'll be a lawyer and I'll do good work during the day and I'll write at night. Well, it was a stupid thought. So I went to law school and I dropped out for a year and I wrote a really, really bad novel. And I worked in a department store in town. Mm-hmm. And it turned out I couldn't sell things very well.
Oh.
And so they kept moving me up until I was on the 6th floor selling mattresses.
Is there a big turnover in mattress sales?
I never sold a mattress in my life. And that's when I realized I have to go back to law school, because that was even worse than cocktail waitressing.
Right.
It's horrible. It was really horrible.
Okay, you weren't a good lawyer.
No, I was not. I wasn't even, it was awful. No.
One of the things that, one of the reasons I asked you about that story is, I know then you decided you were going to be a writer, but it took a long time for that. You were kind of flailing around. So the story I want to get to is how you had your breakthrough and what you did to find, I guess, your writer self.
Are you talking about?
I am.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, I was writing and writing and writing, and nobody wanted it. You know, maybe 1 or 2 people, but nobody really wanted it. And this went on for a long, long time. And so I finally thought to myself, why isn't this working? And I knew it wasn't working. I understood it wasn't quite right. And so I thought it must have to do with honesty, because I'm always aware that good writing has to be honest. And I thought, there must be something that I'm not being honest about. And so I had moved to New York, and I was interested in going to see stand-up comics. And I understood that we laughed at something because it was true. And so I thought to myself, well, what would come out of my mouth if I had to stand there and be the stand-up comic and be responsible for people to laugh? What is it that would come out of my mouth, I wondered. So I signed up for a stand-up comedy class at the New School.
Can you believe that?
And yeah, no, it was
brave.
It was
brave.
Horrifyingly frightening. And every week somebody would drop out because we were all, you know, it was just awful. And those of us that survived the class had, you know, to take our so-called final by performing at the comic strip in New York City. And so I did. And the night I got there, Emerson College was having it was packed. It was horrifying. Nobody that I knew was there. I wouldn't let anybody know that I was even doing this, let alone come see it. But anyway, the point is that, first of all, they did laugh. Thank God. But the point is that my routine was making fun of myself as a white woman from New England. And that's when I learned that I was a white woman from New England. I'm serious. I didn't know it. I didn't know it. That's how white I was, and that's how New England I was.
That's so interesting to me because, for one thing, the thought of performing makes me almost throw up.
It made me
so scary.
I know.
But what a revelation that was.
It was. It was fascinating, and it worked. And then I began to write Amy and Isabel about this very uptight white woman from New England. I mean, Amy, you know, Isabel's not me, but I understood. Oh, this is my place.
Do you remember any of the jokes from your routine?
No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll stop torturing you about that. In Lucy Barton, you have a writer, Sarah Payne, I think is her name, and she's teaching other students. She's a writer herself, but she's teaching writing students. And she says to them that writers really only have one story, and they just write it in many different ways. Do you think Sarah's right in that? And if so, what is your story?
You know, I think Sarah thinks she's right. I do. I think that Sarah Payne believes that. I don't know that I believe it, but it made sense for me that Sarah believed that and would teach it, and I had no problem with her teaching that and believing it, but I'm not sure that I believe it, and I don't know that I believe it for myself. I think, I feel like I have many stories in me, but I think that they're all cut from a similar cloth because I'm me, so I can parse it that way.
Are there themes that, for instance, just, you know, looking at these two books and Amy and Isabel as well, the mother-daughter thing, obviously that's an interesting relationship to you.
Yeah.
This is many of the stories, or some of the stories in Anything is Possible about mother-daughter. Lucy Barton is really about her relationship with her mother. What interests you about that relationship?
Oh, well, I am a mother and I am a daughter. And I think that they're both very powerful in my life. They're both very powerful relationships. But I do write about very different mothers and very different daughters.
Yes.
So, you know, she said defensively. Anyway.
What was your relationship with your own mother? I think you said she taught you to really observe things?
I think she's the reason I'm a writer. I told her that just recently, and she said, oh, no. She said, you would have written anyway. And I said, no, I don't think so, Mom. Because she was always, you know, she has an intuitive power that I think made life interesting for me from a very young age. And she was always interested in people. I have always been interested in people. And I do remember sitting, you know, in the car with her when my father was doing something or other, and she would watch somebody walk down the sidewalk, and she would make just, you know, a comment like, oh, look at that woman's hem on her coat. I guess she's depressed. And I would be like, what, you know, where? how do you know she's I would just be so interested. And I remember, like, I would want to follow that woman home. And I remember thinking, what's that woman's bathroom look like? Does she have pom-poms on her shower curtain? I mean, I really was just so interested in people, and partly because my mother would just drop these things about people.
What a wonderful gift she gave you then.
She really did, and but she really did.
And is that, are you observational? I mean, all writers are, but I mean, do you, for instance, if you see something in Toronto while you're here, would you take out a notebook and write it down? Because
no, I don't write it down, but I might remember it, and I'm always surprised at the things that enter me and then come out later.
In the book, one of the things that I think is remarkable about Anything is Possible, even though horrible things happen to some of the characters, they often look back on their lives and they've had to endure some really horrible stuff. But it's filled with compassion, I think, and redemption.
I hope so.
And certainly compassion. One of the things that we talked about in the green room was how acts of kindness can undo a person who hasn't been used to them, a person who's been deprived or has had a rough life. And there are a couple in this book, maybe you can talk about them. In Lucy Barton, it's the doctor who's just kind to her.
Right.
The janitor, maybe, with Lucy.
Let me just go back for 1 second to the compassion issue, because my father was a scientist, but he was a very compassionate person. He was a lovely man and very, very compassionate, and but he didn't understand writing, and there's just a little thing that I always think of as a very young. We went to the Congregational Church, which in New England is very, very plain. Very plain. Nobody wears hats or anything except maybe Easter. But the point is that one day, this woman, it wasn't Easter, and she was wearing a hat. And for some reason, I was allowed into the big people's church that day. I don't know why. But anyway, this woman was wearing a hat, and it was a little scary because, it had like fake fruit falling off it. And I just remember in the car ride home, my mother said, "Now, why in hell would Clara wear that hat?" And I was so relieved, because I realized it was odd that she was wearing a hat. And my father said to my mother, "If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all," which he would frequently say. And that's death to a writer. Yeah. And
so you blotted that out. Yeah.
Well, but my point is, I understood, even that day as a small kid, I understood that my father was the more decent parent. But my mother was, more interested. And so my whole writing life, I feel like, has been trying to, wrap those two things together. My father's sense of compassion and my mother's honesty, her basic, emotional honesty.
And I think you do that so well in this book. One of the things that Lucy Barton is filled with, and this is a little bit too, is kind of the power of gossip. And I don't mean horrible gossip. I mean gossip just as a way of communicating with people.
Right.
In Lucy Barton, really, it's the only thing that she and her mother can talk about because they can't go anywhere else. So they talk about, and when I think about the way I talk to my mother, who's 89, we talk about, what so-and-so down the street's done and all that kind of thing. It's a kind of, I think it's unfairly maligned.
Oh, I think gossip is very unfairly maligned.
So we should gossip more.
I think it's a wonderful. I think it's a wonderful thing to do.
I think it is too.
I mean, really, if nobody's listening,
who can it hurt?
Then
if you don't have anything nice to say, Elizabeth,
right.
just don't say it.
Well, if nobody's but if you get my point.
Before I leave the books entirely, there was one thing I wanted to say too about as a mother. The book just made me cry at the effect that parents can have on children, whether they mean to or not, whether you had a really deprived childhood like Lucy does, or you do something inadvertent, as happens to these other characters. And, I just don't know how people get over that. Like, do you think they're damaged forever if they've had...
No, I think it's just called being human, right?
That's very New England of you. So you just get on with it.
Yeah, exactly. What's your problem, people? For heaven's sake. Just shut up and deal with it, or don't deal with it. But I mean, I think that most people have some kind of
Yes.
problem with their parents, even if they've been loved tremendously. Maybe that's a problem. It's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way it is. And so everybody has their particular stuff that they have from their life. You just do. And then you're born a certain person with
Mm-hmm.
a particular nature, and then, life takes a few swings at you, and that helps as well. And so you just go along and you do the best you can.
Yeah.
I really do think most of us are doing the best we
Yes,
can.
yes, because life is messy.
Yeah.
Both the books have very optimistic endings, or at least the last line are very, in Lucy Barton, the last line is, "All life amazes me." And in Anything is Possible, a character, I assume near the end of his life, says, the narrator says about the character, "He opened his eyes and yes, there it was, the perfect knowledge. Anything was possible for anyone." Can you talk about that, about the optimism in those endings?
Yeah, well, I'm actually an optimistic person. I really am. I think if people say, "Oh, your work, why can't you write something cheerful?" But I think it is. I think that I'm aware that I think in all my work there's like a redemptive quality.
Mm-hmm.
And I became aware of that at some point, and I thought about it, and I thought, my worry was that it wasn't honest, that it was, but then I realized, no, that's actually how I view life, and therefore, it's in my work.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to be in my work, because it's my life view.
Well, they're lovely, as I say, lovely optimistic lines at the end, and I think both books are really redemptive. I want to just switch tacks a bit and talk about your personal life. Oh, God. Only because it relates in a way to your books, I think, and who you are. Your second husband, tell us about, you met your second husband how? In a situation like this, right?
Yeah, I met my second husband I was doing an event. I was being interviewed by my editor in New York City, and it was dark. I couldn't see. I can see most of you, but I couldn't see because of the lights. And this man stood up, but I couldn't see him, and he asked a question. And he said, "I'm from Maine." And I said, "Oh, that's nice." Because, when you live in New York City, there's so many New Yorkers that claim some connection to Maine because they went to camp there. So I said, "That's nice. Where in Maine do you come from?" And he said, "Lisbon Falls." And then I thought, oh, whoa, he is really from Maine. And then I also thought, that's pretty cool. He admits that he's from Lisbon Falls. So there was an honesty right there. And then he ended up being the first in line to have his book signed. And we chatted for a little bit, and off he went. And when I watched him leave, I thought, that's what my life should have been. I wasn't married at the time.
Wow.
But
And so how did you reconnect with him?
well, he had apparently left me his email, which I found later. And so we emailed back and forth, and we met twice, and then we got married.
They're very efficient in New England. Meet twice, get married, really. Don't bother with the party, you've done that already. Yes, exactly. He was he was a politician. Is he retired now? He's not a politician anymore?
No, he's not a politician.
So he was in the Maine legislature, and he was Attorney General, I believe, for a while. So do you talk about politics
Yes,
a lot in your house?
we talk a great deal about politics.
You might be able to see what I'm coming up to here.
I hope I don't.
So I'm just wondering what somebody like Olive Kittredge would make of our current situation of Donald Trump in the White House. I can't decide.
I think that Olive Kittredge would be I think she would be number 1, appalled, and number 2, intrigued.
Would she be the kind of person to march, to do anything like that?
If she could, yes, I think she would have.
And what about you, Elizabeth Strout? Not are you marching, but, you know,
right.
What
well,
are you thinking of the current politics?
What do I think? Oh. Honestly, I think it's so horrifying that I'm just horrified every day. Brings something new that is. It's almost hard to absorb.
It is. Okay, we won't. In fact, you know, that's exactly the thing. You can't even keep up with the news, can you?
Right.
Because all the time something else is happening.
It's really very frightening.
Okay. Let's end with something that you wrote, I think, for the Atlantic Monthly on childhood and memory.
Right.
It was such a lovely piece. It was, I think, just really a guest piece that you wrote, right? An appreciation of a poem.
Yeah.
So the poem was, well, you can talk about the poem and why you wrote about it.
A poem by Louise Glick, and the last line of it is, I think it's such a gorgeous line. It says, "We look at the world once in childhood, the rest is memory." Isn't that gorgeous? We look at the world once in childhood, the rest is memory.
So
love it.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
But do you think that's true?
I do. Because when I read that poem and I read that line, I thought, oh, she's so right. That's what I thought. So yes, I do think she's right.
So the experience. So maybe you could just talk about what.
And so as I thought about this, I realized, okay, what this means is that if we look at life once in childhood and the rest is memory, then, like, what interests me about this in particular is, like, where is that memory going to come from? And it comes from language that we're taught, and then it makes me think about the misuse of language and how we misuse language so frequently that it can dull our senses of memory, and it can even dull our experiences, because there's just so much false language. You know, for example, like I used to live in a building, and there was this mother. I'm sorry, do we have time for?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, so there was a mother, and she had 3 little boys, and the little boy, he had a birthday party. It was a big deal, clown, the whole thing, and he was crying at the end of it. You know, he was overstimulated. Obviously, it was just been too much for him. And so I heard him say at the end of the day, "I hated my birthday. I hated my birthday." And his mother said, "You didn't hate your birthday. You had a wonderful birthday." And I thought to myself, no, that kid hated his birthday. And my point is, I'm not talking about how to raise children, but my point is, this happens all the time. So we're taught at a very, say something that's truthful, we're taught, no, that's not true. And so after a certain point, then our emotions even get a little warped, and we don't even necessarily know how we feel about things. And so fiction, I think, real fiction is there to help us remember those true emotions that we had in childhood when we were uncorrupted. We were yet uncorrupted.
And is that what you think your writing, or you hope your writing does?
Yeah. Yep.
Succinct.
That'd be my hope.
That would be your hope. Well,
yeah.
It does. And that's a wonderful poem, and thank you for sharing it for us. Okay.